Her hands trembled as she held the papers. The marble floor beneath her feet was cold, colder than it had ever been in the 18 months she'd walked these palace halls. The divorce agreement lay heavy in her hands, each word a small death. 50 pages of legal language that reduced her entire marriage, her entire life, to a transaction. The diamond ring caught the light one last time before she slipped it off her finger. It didn't feel like jewelry anymore. It felt like evidence. She was standing in a palace that cost more than entire villages back home, surrounded by every luxury money could purchase, and she had never felt more empty. The 5 million wedding that captivated the world, that made headlines from Dubai to Manila, was over. Not because love died. Love had never been there to die. What was ending was an illusion so perfect, so meticulously constructed that even she had believed it, until the moment she didn't anymore. How does a man spend $5 million to marry a woman, then spend another fortune trying to erase her from his life? How does a fairy tale wedding become a nightmare you can't wake up from? And how does a woman escape from a golden cage when the bars are made of promises and the locks are made of money? These are the questions that started it all. She was 26 years old, working at a 5-star hotel in Manila, folding towels and organizing guest amenities. Her name was Aisha, though she would later become known to the world simply as the Filipina bride. Her life was modest but honest. She sent money home to her family. She saved carefully. She dreamed of a better future but didn't expect miracles. Miracles didn't happen to girls like her. Sheikh Abdullah Al-Thani was 61 years old when he first saw her. He was in Manila for business, though business was a word that covered a multitude of activities in his world. He owned companies across 3 continents, held stakes in real estate that spanned from London to Hong Kong, and wielded the kind of quiet power that made presidents return his calls. His wealth wasn't just money. It was generational, institutional, almost geographical in scale. There were buildings named after his family. There were policy changes made because of his influence. He was not accustomed to hearing the word no. He saw her replacing amenities in his suite and decided, in that moment, that he would have her. It wasn't love. He would never claim it was. What it was acquisition. She represented something he'd been collecting for decades: youth, beauty, the appearance of vitality. The way she moved through the room, efficient, graceful, unaware of his gaze, made her seem innocent, untouched. That appeal lasted exactly as long as she remained unaware of his interest. He had his staff investigate her. Within 48 hours, he knew everything: her family's financial struggles, her siblings' names, her mother's health condition, the exact amount of debt her family carried. He knew that her father had passed away 5 years earlier, that she was the primary provider, that she had dreams of opening a small business but lacked the capital. He knew, essentially, all her pressure points. The first approach was subtle. She was offered a special position managing the suites of VIP guests, a promotion that came with a significant salary increase. Within a week, she had direct access to him. Within 2 weeks, he had invited her to dinner. Within a month, he had proposed. She said yes. Not because she loved him, not even because she was naive. Though she was younger and less experienced than she should have been to play the game she was entering. She said yes because her mother needed surgery, because her siblings' school fees were overdue, because a man with unlimited resources was offering her a way to save her family from drowning. She said yes because that's what women in precarious situations often do when a powerful man offers them salvation. The wedding was announced 3 months later. The world watched as preparations began. A private island was leased in the Maldives. 500 guests were invited: celebrities, diplomats, business titans, and social media influencers who were paid 6 figures just to attend and post. Photographers from Vogue and Harper's Bazaar were granted exclusive access. The dress alone cost $200,000, custom designed by a legendary Italian fashion house, requiring 40 seamstresses working for 2 months. The wedding day arrived in an explosion of opulence. White roses were flown in from Ecuador at $50 per bloom. The ceremony was conducted in 3 languages. The reception featured a 7-course meal prepared by Michelin-starred chefs. The cake was 6 tiers and decorated with edible gold. The fireworks display lasted 45 minutes and could be seen from the neighboring island. She looked like a princess. She felt like an actress playing a role she hadn't auditioned for. The photographs were stunning, her face radiant, his hand possessive on her back, the 2 of them framed against sunsets and marble and endless wealth. These images circulated through social media, reaching millions. Magazines ran the photos with headlines like, "From Cinderella to Sheikh's crown jewel, and love knows no boundaries." Comments poured in from women around the world expressing envy, admiration, a kind of desperate hope that maybe magic like this could happen to them too. What nobody could see in those photographs was the tension in her jaw. What nobody could read in the images was the script he had given her. Smile at this angle, touch his arm here, lean toward him but not too much. She was a prop in a production designed to showcase not love, but power. His power to acquire, his power to transform, his power to take an ordinary woman and remake her into an accessory to his extraordinary life. Her family, watching from the guest section, was overwhelmed. Her mother cried. Tears of gratitude that their financial struggles were over. Tears of relief that her daughter was taken care of. Tears that she didn't yet understand were premature. They didn't see the way the Sheikh's family looked at her, with barely concealed disdain, assessing her like they were pricing livestock. They didn't hear the comments whispered in Arabic, language she didn't speak, about her being beneath them, about this marriage being a midlife indulgence that would pass. The honeymoon was a yacht tour through the Mediterranean, stopping at ports where paparazzi were somehow always waiting. More photographs. More headlines. The narrative was being constructed. This was a love story for our time, a story about how wealth could transcend boundaries, how a man could fall so deeply that he would move mountains to have his bride. The narrative was a lie. The honeymoon lasted 3 weeks. The illusion lasted slightly longer, maybe a month into the marriage before the first crack appeared. They were in his penthouse in Dubai when she made a small mistake. She had scheduled a video call with her mother without asking permission. She hadn't known she needed to ask permission. When he found out, his response was swift and cold. He didn't yell. He didn't need to. He simply explained, in a voice that suggested he was discussing something obvious with a child, that she would not be speaking to her family without his knowledge going forward. Her phone would be monitored. Her movements would be tracked. She was his wife, which meant she belonged to him, which meant her previous life, her family, her friends, her identity, belonged to him now too. "You have me," he said. "You have everything. You don't need them anymore." She tried to argue. She tried to explain that family wasn't something you could replace with money. He listened with an expression of patient condescension, as though she was explaining something she fundamentally didn't understand. Then he took her phone and had it replaced with one that he controlled. All calls went through his security team. All messages were monitored. All attempts to connect with the world outside his domain were logged and reviewed. The isolation was methodical. Her friends from the hotel were deemed not appropriate for a woman of her new status. The few people from her previous life who tried to maintain contact were blocked or redirected by his staff. He didn't do this with cruelty. He did it with gifts and explanations. New friends were introduced. Women from wealthy families who understood the world of luxury, who would teach her how to be properly the wife of a man like him. These women were friendly enough, but they were also gatekeepers, making sure she didn't embarrass him, making sure she understood the rules. The prenuptial agreement, which she had signed without fully reading it, suddenly became very relevant. A copy was placed on her desk one morning with a note suggesting she familiarize herself with its contents. The agreement was a masterpiece of financial architecture designed to ensure that in the event of a divorce, she would walk away with essentially nothing. The $5 million wedding had been a gift, yes, but it was a gift, not marital property. Any jewelry, properties, or funds given to her during the marriage could be reclaimed. She was entitled to no percentage of his wealth, regardless of the duration of the marriage. It was a contract that said, in legal terms, "You are temporary." She asked him about it. Her voice was small, frightened. He looked at her as though she had disappointed him greatly. "Of course the agreement protects my assets," he said. "What did you expect? That you would somehow have a claim to my family's fortune? You understand that I am one of thousands of wealthy men in this region, and I am not the first to marry a woman from circumstances like yours. The agreement exists to prevent precisely the kind of situation that happens so often. Women who marry men like me and then later claim they deserve half of everything. It's protection, not punishment. It's practical, not personal." But it was personal. It was deeply personal. It was a document that said, "I don't trust you. I think you married me for money. I believe you will betray me. I am already preparing for the end before we've truly begun." She was trapped in a palace made of marble and money, and the doors were locked from the outside. The first time she suspected he was with another woman, she was folding his shirt and found lipstick stains on the collar. The shade was wrong. Too bold. Too young, too different from anything she would wear. When she asked him about it, he looked at her with something between amusement and contempt. "You don't ask me questions like that," he said simply. There was no anger in his voice. That would have been easier to handle. Anger implied passion, and passion implied she mattered enough to inspire emotion. His tone suggested she was a child asking about something beyond her comprehension, and it was tedious to explain, but he would do so anyway because he was patient. "In my world," he continued, "marriages like ours exist for stability, for appearance, for legacy. They do not exist for the kind of juvenile romance you seem to have believed in. I married you because you are beautiful, because it pleased me to do so, because you bring a certain aesthetic to my life. But I have never pretended to be a man who remains faithful. Men like me do not remain faithful. We are not built for it. We have appetites. We have options. We do what we wish because we have the resources to do it." He said this to her face, without apology, without any attempt to soften the truth. And somehow, that clarity was more crushing than deception would have been. Deception at least acknowledges that the truth is shameful. Honesty like this was worse. It suggested that his infidelities weren't failings or mistakes. They were simply how things were. And if she had a problem with it, the problem was with her for being naive enough to expect differently. The whispers in Dubai's social circles began to reach her. His staff was talking, servants and drivers and security personnel who had access to information. They knew about the apartments he kept. They knew about the women. There were rumors of text messages, of secret meetings, of a second family in Abu Dhabi that nobody was supposed to talk about. The rumors circulated through the service staff and eventually reached her, filtered through a housekeeper who took pity on her. Her attempts to confront him became less frequent and then stopped entirely. Each time she tried to assert herself, tried to demand fidelity or honesty or basic respect, she was reminded of her position. She had no leverage. She had no money of her own. She had no family she could reach out to because communication was monitored. She had no career to fall back on. She had nothing except what he gave her, and what he gave her could be taken away. The depression that set in was silent and insidious. She stopped leaving the palace unless accompanied by his security team. She stopped trying to make friends. She stopped asking questions. She became a beautiful object that occupied space in his life, like a painting or a sculpture. Appreciated, but not consulted. Present, but not really seen. A year into the marriage, she found herself sitting on a terrace overlooking Dubai's skyline, holding a glass of wine that cost more than she used to make in a week, and realizing that she had never been more miserable in her entire life. The irony was so sharp it could cut. She had been poor before, but she had been free. Now she was rich, and she was imprisoned. The moment came on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. She was sitting in her suite. Yes, she had her own suite by then, because he preferred not to share a bed with her anymore, when his phone rang. His assistant answered, and somehow the call was transferred to her room by mistake. She heard his voice, intimate and playful, making plans with someone named Yasmin. She heard him promise things he had never promised her. She heard him arrange a weekend in Monaco, speak in tones of affection, make jokes that suggested genuine connection. She hung up the phone before he realized the call had been transferred. But something shifted inside her in that moment. For the first time in months, she felt something other than resignation. She felt anger, real, clarifying, mobilizing anger. She realized that she had been waiting for something, for him to change, for him to fall in love with her, for the situation to improve somehow. She had been passive, accepting, hopeful despite everything. And in that moment, listening to him seduce another woman with the same words he had probably used on her, she understood that she would die in this prison if she didn't save herself. She began planning carefully. She documented his infidelities, taking photographs of receipts and hotel bills that careless servants left around. She monitored his schedule, understanding that he was in Dubai 3 days a week, traveling the other 4. She reached out to one of his drivers, a man from Pakistan who had shown her small kindnesses, and asked if he could help her make a single phone call, just one, that nobody would know about. He could. She called her mother. Their conversation lasted 4 minutes. She explained nothing. She couldn't, not with the risk of being discovered. But she told her mother to contact a lawyer, to prepare, to be ready. She ended the call before she could say goodbye. The next morning, she walked into the Sheikh's study while he was eating breakfast and told him she wanted a divorce. His reaction was not what she expected. There was no rage, no denial, no attempt to convince her otherwise. Instead, he smiled. It was the smile of a man who had been waiting for this moment, who had already anticipated every move she would make. "Of course," he said calmly. "I expected this would happen eventually. Women like you always do. They think they can adjust to life at my level, and then they realize they can't. It's natural. It's almost predictable." She felt the floor shift beneath her. The way he said, "women like you," made her understand that she wasn't the first to come to this moment, and she wouldn't be the last. She had believed her situation was unique because she believed he had felt something special for her. Now she understood that her situation was routine. She was one in a series. "I have lawyers handling this already," he continued. "They're very good at making these situations clean and quiet. You will be taken care of within the parameters of the agreement you signed, and then you can return to your previous life if that's what you wish. Though I suspect you'll find it difficult to adjust to poverty after experiencing wealth." That last part was calculated. It was designed to make her feel that any life outside his sphere would be a kind of death, that she had been ruined for normal living. He couldn't see or didn't care that she was already dead inside his world. The only way out was to accept that the previous life she had known before him might be the freest life she had left. The divorce lawyers made her understand what naive really meant. The prenuptial agreement that she had signed in a blur of wedding preparations, barely reading it because she was dizzy with the speed of everything, was ironclad. Every clause had been constructed by lawyers working for him, designed to protect his interests, written in language that was technically legal but morally devastating. The settlement offered was $50,000. That was it. $50,000 for 18 months of her life, for the $5 million wedding that had been her bride price, for the jewelry he was reclaiming, for the humiliation and isolation and psychological damage. The number was an insult, and they both knew it. But it was also more than the prenup technically required him to give, and his lawyers presented it as evidence of his generosity. Her own lawyers, Modest lawyers from Manila who had never handled anything on this scale were outmatched. Every document they filed was countered with 3 more, each one thicker and more complex than the last. His legal team had resources that seemed infinite. They had connections to judges, to politicians, to officials in multiple countries. They had a strategy that was less about winning in any traditional sense and more about making the process so expensive and exhausting that she would eventually break and accept whatever terms they offered. They tried to introduce evidence of his infidelities. It was deemed irrelevant to the financial proceedings. They tried to argue that the marriage was entered into through coercion given her family's financial desperation. The argument was rejected. She had signed the prenup, which meant she had entered into the marriage with full knowledge of the terms. They tried to appeal on grounds of exploitation. Each appeal took months and cost money she didn't have. Meanwhile, her family was suffering. Without the financial support she had been providing, without the money he had been giving her to send home, her mother's health deteriorated. Her youngest brother had to leave school. The creditors started calling again. She was winning her freedom, but the cost of that freedom was being paid by everyone she loved. The Sheikh's media team, working in the background, was constructing a narrative. Stories began appearing in gossip columns about a Filipina woman who had married a wealthy man and was now trying to claim half his fortune. She was depicted as a gold digger, a fortune hunter, a woman who didn't understand her place. There were insinuations that she had been unfaithful, though no evidence was ever presented. There were suggestions that she had married him under false pretenses, that she had trapped him, that she was lucky to receive anything at all. The public narrative, which had celebrated her Cinderella story during the wedding, now turned vicious. Social media became a place where strangers felt comfortable calling her names, making judgments about her character, celebrating her misfortune. The same photographers who had documented her fairy tale now pursued her for images of her suffering. She was trapped in a legal system designed to protect the powerful, fighting an opponent who had infinite resources and no moral constraints, while the world watched and judged. There was no victory available to her, only degrees of defeat. 18 months into the legal proceedings, exhausted and running out of money, she accepted the settlement. $50,000. It was simultaneously more and less than she had expected. The processing of the payment felt like a transaction, not a resolution. A wire transfer that ended her marriage as efficiently as the marriage had begun. Quickly, quietly, without anyone really asking if she was okay. She returned to Manila with nothing except the $50,000 and the understanding that she had been destroyed in a way that money couldn't repair. The palace had released her, but the palace had also changed her. She was different now, harder, more cynical, carrying wounds that didn't show on her skin. Her family received her with complicated emotions. They were relieved that she was back, but they were also disappointed that the financial windfall had ended. She could see in their eyes the calculation. They had gotten 6 months of stability, but now they were back where they started. Worse, actually, because now they knew what stability felt like. She found work at a different hotel, taking a position far below what she had done before. She couldn't go back to where she had worked before. The shame, the whispers, the way people would look at her. She started from the bottom again, folding towels like she used to, except now she was doing it as a woman who had been a sheikh's bride and hadn't kept it. She told nobody about the marriage. Not at first. The story seemed too humiliating, too revealing of her own naivety, too likely to invite judgment. She kept it private, a wound that she tended alone. But the internet had memories longer than her hope. A journalist researching wealth inequality stumbled across the wedding announcement and recognized her working at a hotel in Manila. The journalist approached her, and something in the approach, a kind of genuine curiosity rather than opportunistic sensationalism, made her decide to tell the story. Not for revenge, not for the money that was gone, but maybe to warn other women, to expose a system that protected predators and punished prey. If you've ever felt trapped by someone's generosity, if you've mistaken control for love, if you've started to wonder if you were naive for believing in fairy tales, Stay tuned. Her story might save yours. 2 years after the divorce was finalized, a headline appeared that stopped her in her tracks. Sheikh Abdullah Al-Thani had married again. The bride was a 19-year-old model from Brazil. The wedding was planned for 6 months later. The budget was $6 million. She felt sick reading it. Not from jealousy. She had processed that she had never loved him, but from a kind of horror at seeing the machinery wind up again, about to crush another woman. She reached out to the journalist who had helped her tell her story. "It's happened before," she told him. "He's married and divorced 5 times. There are women in Saudi Arabia, in the UAE, in London. All the same story. Money, then control, then abandonment. The prenups are always the same. The isolation is always the same." The journalist took the information and began investigating. What he uncovered was a pattern so consistent it was almost clinical. Sheikh Abdullah Al-Thani had married 6 times total. Each marriage lasted between 1 and 3 years. Each bride had been younger than the last wife. Each bride had signed ironclad prenuptials. Each divorce had been followed by a settlement small enough to insult, but large enough to buy silence. There were more women than just Aisha who started to come forward. Some hesitantly, through messages. Some publicly, once one woman broke the silence. The stories were variations on a theme: the charm, the speed, the wealth deployed as a weapon, the isolation, the infidelities, the degradation. The pattern was undeniable. The second marriage, to the Brazilian model, proceeded. But this time, there were journalists watching. There were women warning the bride, though she was too young and too overwhelmed to listen. The wedding happened anyway, just as expensive, just as public, just as much of a performance. And then, 1 year and 3 months into that marriage, the Brazilian bride disappeared from public view entirely. Rumors suggested she was being kept in an apartment in Monaco, that she was depressed, that she had tried to leave and been prevented from doing so. Her family hired lawyers. An investigation began in Brazil into potential human trafficking. The situation spiraled. His legal team went into overdrive. But this time, they couldn't manage it like they had managed Aisha's divorce. The Brazilian bride's family had resources. They had government connections. They had lawyers who weren't intimidated by his wealth. The narrative that had worked before, a woman who simply didn't understand her place, who was trying to take advantage of a generous man, didn't work anymore now that there were 3 women telling the same story, then 4, then 5. The real turning point came when one of his daughters, his eldest daughter from his first marriage, a woman named Fatima, gave an interview to a major news outlet. She spoke about growing up watching her father collect and discard wives like accessories. She spoke about the emotional damage it had caused her, about her mother's suffering, about the way his behavior had shaped her understanding of marriage and power. But she also spoke about his business practices. She described how she had discovered that some of his wealth came from partnerships with companies that were exploiting labor in hospitality and domestic work. She described how she had watched her father recruit women from vulnerable circumstances and understood that it wasn't coincidence. It was a pattern of predatory behavior that extended beyond his marriages into his business dealings. "My father doesn't see women as people," Fatima said in the interview. "He sees them as commodities, and when he marries them, he's just making it official, treating a person like property. What I've realized is that this behavior didn't start with his marriages. It started with how he conducts business. The marriages are just a reflection of how he sees the world." The interview went viral. It was shared millions of times. And suddenly, the narrative shifted. This wasn't a story about marriages anymore. It was a story about exploitation, about the abuse of power, about how wealth could be used as a tool of control. Documentarians reached out to Aisha. Would she participate in a film about luxury marriages and exploitation? Would she let her face be shown? Would she tell her story to cameras, knowing it would be seen by millions, knowing it would permanently tie her identity to this experience? She said yes. Not for vindication. she knew that vindication wasn't coming. She said yes because she understood that her story had power only if it was shared, that her suffering could have meaning only if it prevented someone else's suffering. The documentary took 2 years to make. It featured interviews with all 5 of his ex-wives. It investigated his business practices. It examined the broader context of how wealthy men exploit vulnerable women in the hospitality industry. It looked at how prenuptial agreements could be used as weapons of coercion. It revealed a system that protected the powerful and punished the powerless. And it showed how one man's behavior was not aberrant but archetypal. When it premiered at a major film festival, it caused a sensation. Not all of it was positive. Some people argued that the women should have known better. Some people defended the Sheikh, arguing that consenting adults could structure their relationships however they wanted. Some people suggested that the women were motivated by jealousy or revenge. But the documentary also sparked something else. Policy conversations began. A major hotel chain announced an investigation into labor practices. Lawyers started approaching other women who had been in relationships with powerful men, not just the Sheikh, but others like him, offering to help them pursue cases that had been considered legally impossible before. What happened next shocked the entire social circle of powerful men in the Gulf region, and it exposed a pattern that affects thousands of women like her. The Sheikh tried to suppress the documentary. He hired lawyers to file injunctions. He approached the streaming platform with offers of significant payments to remove it. He threatened legal action against every woman who participated in it. Nothing worked. The internet doesn't forget, and it doesn't respect wealth in the way power usually does. More women came forward. Not just his ex-wives, but women who had worked in his companies. Women who had been approached by him or his representatives in hotels and clubs. Women who had stories of predatory behavior and exploitation. Each story was different in detail, but identical in pattern. His family fractured. His sons, embarrassed and angry, distanced themselves from him. His daughters, all of them now, gave additional interviews about what it was like growing up with a father who viewed women as disposable. His ex-wives from his early marriages, women who thought they had moved on from him decades ago, spoke publicly about the long-term damage his treatment had caused them. The business complications were worse. Investigations were opened into his company practices. Partners began withdrawing from joint ventures. His reputation, which had been carefully cultivated over decades, deteriorated in months. The wealth remained. It was too vast to disappear quickly, but the social standing evaporated. He became, in a way, invisible. The philanthropic institutions that had borne his name removed it. The universities where his donations had purchased buildings renamed them. The people who had attended his parties stopped accepting his invitations. The whole apparatus of social elevation that wealth had constructed for him began to collapse. The deepest truth emerged slowly, through investigations and interviews and documentary research. The $5 million wedding wasn't just about marrying a woman. It was about control. The control that comes from taking someone's life and reshaping it entirely. It was about the power to elevate and diminish, to give and take away, to construct and deconstruct an identity. And what emerged in researching his business practices was something more disturbing. A pattern of actively recruiting vulnerable women into positions where they could be exploited. Hotels in developing countries where he had business interests saw unusual hiring practices. Young, beautiful women from poor families being hired into positions with direct access to clients. Women who were then propositioned, coerced, or seduced into relationships or arrangements that benefited him. The marriage to Aisha wasn't an anomaly. It was just the most public manifestation of a pattern that extended through his entire life. The difference was that the marriage was documented, photographed, broadcast to the world. And when it ended, the documentation of the opulence made the exploitation visible in a way it couldn't be hidden. Aisha works at a community center in Manila, helping women who have experienced exploitation and abuse. She doesn't have wealth anymore. She has a small apartment, a modest salary, and a life that most people would consider ordinary. But she has something she didn't have in the palace. She has freedom. She has agency. She has the right to make decisions about her own life. She still doesn't make enough to help her family the way she did before. But her family understands now, in a way they didn't when she was married, that her worth isn't measured in what she can provide them financially. They see her and recognize themselves. Her mother in her resilience, her siblings in her refusal to be broken. The documentary about her experience won awards. She received offers for book deals, for movie rights, for speaking engagements. She turned most of them down. She didn't want her suffering to become entertainment for others, but she did participate in educational programs about recognizing exploitation, about understanding how power is wielded, about the red flags that many women overlook because they want to believe in love and transformation. She receives messages from women around the world. Some are women in situations similar to hers, asking for advice. Some are women who watch the documentary and recognize themselves in her story. Not married to a sheikh, but trapped in relationships with men who used money and control interchangeably. Some are young women who are considering marriages to older, wealthy men, asking her to tell them what they need to know. To those women, she says this: real love doesn't require that you cut off your family to prove it. Real love doesn't monitor your phone calls. Real love doesn't come with the message that you should be grateful for generosity because it can be taken away at any time. Real love doesn't make you feel like you're playing a role in someone else's story instead of the author of your own. She tells them, money is a beautiful thing. Security is important. Financial stability matters. But not at the cost of your autonomy, your identity, your connection to the people who knew you before money came into your life. There are forms of poverty that are worse than financial poverty, and one of them is the poverty of having everything except yourself. What Aisha's story reveals is something that extends far beyond her specific experience. It's about how power operates in intimate relationships. It's about how wealth can be weaponized. It's about how systems are constructed to protect the powerful and punish those who dare to question them. In Aisha's case, it was a sheikh and a Filipina hotel worker. But this dynamic plays out in countless relationships, in countless countries, in countless configurations of inequality. It happens between older men and younger women, between wealthy partners and less financially secure partners, between people with social power and people without it. The specific details change, but the mechanism remains. Money deployed as control, generosity revealed as coercion, love revealed as possession. Aisha didn't lose everything by leaving that marriage. She lost money, yes. She lost the appearance of status and security. She lost the fantasy of a transformed life. But what she gained was something the palace could never have given her. She gained herself back. She regained the capacity to make decisions about her own life. She reclaimed the ability to contact her family, to choose her own friends, to speak freely. She reestablished ownership of her own narrative. That's worth more than $5 million. The question that opened this story: how does a man spend $5 million to marry a woman, then spend another fortune trying to erase her from his life? Now has an answer. He spends it because in his worldview, people aren't partners or companions. They're acquisitions. And when an acquisition loses its appeal or challenges the owner's authority, the only rational thing to do is to dispose of it and acquire something new. But what the sheikh didn't count on was this: acquisitions, if they're human beings, have the capacity to become something more. They can refuse to disappear. They can speak. They can connect with others who have similar stories. They can transform their pain into purpose. They can build new lives that don't revolve around the man who tried to own them. That's the real story. Not the fairy tale that began with a proposal in a 5-star hotel, but the resurrection that followed the collapse. Not the $5 million wedding that nobody could forget, but the ordinary, priceless freedom that came after. Not the palace, but the small apartment in Manila where a woman who survived exploitation now helps others do the same. That's the ending that nobody was supposed to get, and that's why it matters.